Roman legions marched 20 miles every single day, carrying 70 pounds of gear, right? That's the legend that's dominated military history for centuries. But the real story behind Rome's marching machine is far stranger than anyone imagined. The myth of the unstoppable Roman legion grinding out 20 miles daily like clockwork comes from a single source that most people have never questioned and what historians have recently uncovered about actual Roman campaign speeds will completely flip everything you thought you knew about ancient military endurance. The 20-mile Roman march isn't just exaggerated, it's based on a nostalgic fantasy written 400 years after Rome's greatest military triumphs, penned by a man who never commanded troops in battle and was desperately trying to revive a fading empire. Vegetius, writing his manual called De Re Militari in the late 4th century, claimed that Roman recruits should train to march 20 Roman miles in roughly 5 hours at ordinary step and 24 miles at quick step. This single passage has echoed through military academies, documentaries, and history books for over 1,500 years, establishing the image of Roman soldiers as superhuman marching machines who could cover marathon distances day after day without breaking stride. But here's where it gets interesting. Vegetius wasn't describing what Roman armies actually did on campaign. He was describing an idealized training regimen that he believed the declining Roman military had abandoned. He was writing during a period of massive military reform when Rome was desperately trying to hold together a fragmenting empire, and his entire book reads like a nostalgic plea to return to the glory days of discipline and strength that may have never existed in the form he imagined. When historians started comparing Vegetius' claims against actual campaign records from Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars and archaeological evidence from marching camps across Britain and Europe, the real picture of Roman military movement emerged, and it's dramatically different from the legend. Caesar's own battle accounts reveal that Roman armies on active campaign typically covered between 15 and 25 kilometers per day, which translates to roughly 9 to 15 miles, not 20. Even under favorable conditions with good weather and decent roads, the practical reality of moving thousands of troops with their equipment and supplies meant that daily distances were far more modest than the training ideal Vegetius described centuries later. Here's the part most people never hear. The famous 20-mile march wasn't what legions did every day on campaign. It was a training exercise designed to push recruits to their physical limits during peacetime conditioning. During actual military operations, Roman commanders had to balance speed with sustainability, logistics, and tactical readiness. Archaeological surveys of Roman marching camps in Scotland from Agricola's campaigns show that the spacing between camps regularly indicates daily movements of 20 kilometers or less, and these were campaigns where the army wasn't even engaged in major battles every day. The weight of equipment that each legionary carried ranged from 25 to 30 kilograms, including armor, weapons, tools, personal supplies, and a portion of the camp fortification materials. The sarsana, or marching pack, contained everything from entrenching tools to tent sections to several days' worth of grain rations. After marching for 5 to 6 hours, which was the standard daily marching time, the soldiers still had to construct a fortified camp, complete with ditches and wooden palisades, before they could rest. This crucial detail explains why Roman armies didn't march from dawn to dusk, covering maximum distance. They needed energy and daylight hours remaining to build defensive positions every single evening. Now, this is where researchers were stunned. When military historians examined the logistics of moving a full Roman army with its baggage train, they discovered that the column could stretch between 15 and 30 miles in length when traveling along a single road. The baggage train alone might extend 20 miles because it included pack animals, carts with siege equipment, medical supplies, additional food stores, and all the material needed to keep for legions and their auxiliaries functioning as a fighting force. This creates a mathematical paradox that shatters the 20-mile myth completely. If the front of the column stops after 20 miles of marching, and the column itself is 25 miles long, the rear units haven't even started moving yet. The solution Roman commanders implemented was spacing the march so that different units departed at staggered intervals, and the entire army would typically march for only 6 hours to allow time for everyone to reassemble at the new camp location before nightfall. Even more fascinating is what happens when you compare Roman marching speeds to other professional armies throughout history. Napoleon's Grande Armée, often considered one of the most mobile military forces ever assembled, typically covered 22 kilometers per day during normal operations. The most extraordinary forced march of the Napoleonic Wars division, Friant's legendary approach to Austerlitz, covered 125 kilometers in 46 hours of marching spread over 3 days. which works out to 42 kilometers per day under emergency conditions, with troops arriving exhausted and barely combat effective. Alexander the Great's army, another force famous for its mobility and endurance, never exceeded 19.5 miles per day according to detailed logistics analysis, and 13 miles was far more typical during the campaigns across Persia. But this is the part almost everyone gets wrong. Roman roads, the engineering marvel that connected the empire, didn't make legions faster in the way most people imagine. What the roads actually did was provide consistency and reliability. On dry, unpaved roads, a Roman legion could manage only about 8 miles per day because of dust, uneven terrain, and the constant need to repair carts and deal with injuries from rough ground. In wet weather on unpaved routes, movement became nearly impossible at any speed as mud bogged down wagons and exhausted troops. On paved Roman roads, however, that same legion could reliably cover 22-25 miles per day, regardless of weather conditions. The roads didn't increase maximum marching speed. They increased operational tempo by eliminating the variability and delays that crippled armies moving through wilderness or along primitive tracks. This distinction is crucial because it reveals that the 20-mile march wasn't a daily standard. It was an upper ceiling that became achievable specifically because of Roman engineering infrastructure. Without those roads, Roman armies moved at speeds nearly identical to every other ancient military force, limited by human endurance, logistics, and the friction of moving thousands of people and tons of supplies across real terrain. Here's the twist almost no one talks about. When Roman armies needed to move fast in emergencies, they could cover 40 kilometers or more by marching for 10 to 11 hours and eating prepared rations on the move. But these forced marches were unsustainable. Historical accounts show that after 1 or 2 days of forced marching, armies needed rest days to recover, or combat effectiveness plummeted. Julius Caesar famously used forced marches to surprise enemies. But he could unmaintain that pace for extended campaigns without his legions falling apart from exhaustion and attrition. The sustainable pace, the speed that Roman armies could maintain week after week during months-long campaigns, was significantly slower than the legendary 20-mile daily march. Modern military science confirms this with data from armies ranging from the Vietnam War-era U.S. forces to Indo-Pacific Japanese travelers. The U.S. Army Field Manual from the Vietnam era listed 32 kilometers in 8 hours as standard, with forced marches reaching 56 kilometers in 24 hours, assuming field rations and modern logistics support. Even with 20th century nutrition, medical care, and equipment, the sustainable daily march rate for infantry remained remarkably close to what Roman legions actually achieved 2,000 years earlier, and well below the mythical standard attributed to them. The real secret of Roman military dominance was unsuperhuman endurance, or the ability to march further than any other army in history. The secret was systematic logistics, engineering infrastructure, disciplined training, and the organizational capacity to keep tens of thousands of troops supplied and combat-ready across vast distances for years at a time. Roman legions won battles because they could show up in fighting condition after covering hundreds of miles. Not because they raced there faster than physics and human biology allowed. They built camps every night that provided security and rest. They constructed roads that guaranteed mobility regardless of season. And they maintained supply lines that meant soldiers weren't foraging desperately and arriving malnourished at battle sites. The 20-mile march was an aspirational training goal and an upper limit made possible by ideal conditions, not a daily reality that Roman armies sustained throughout long campaigns. Vegetus wrote his manual as a reformist plea during Rome's decline, idealizing a past that existed more in patriotic imagination than in the mud and blood of actual campaign records. The true achievement of Roman legions wasn't mythical endurance. It was the unglamorous mastery of logistics, infrastructure, and systematic organization that let ordinary human soldiers accomplish extraordinary strategic objectives year after year across an entire continent. That's the reality behind the legend, and it's far more impressive than the myth because it was actually achievable and sustainable. Which is why Rome conquered the known world while other empires that pushed their armies past sustainable limits collapsed from within. What myth should I break down next?